Hi guys, my name is Amit Siddiqui. In this series of videos, we're going to go through how human metabolism works. Essentially, how we harvest the energy from the food that we eat. You know, biochemistry has an amazing ability to make you realize that we are these biological robots, these immensely complex robots that have machinery not like the ones that we see in the world, but rather these atomic machines that somehow work together to create life. Carl Sagan had this beautiful quote where he said that the beauty of living things is not the atoms that go into it, but the way those atoms are put together. And so my hope is through these series of videos, you will see the beauty that exists in life through the lens of biochemistry. Now in these videos, we're going to cover glycolysis, we're going to cover the citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain. Now, we're going to start with the electron transport chain, which is the very last process that's involved in creating energy. Because once you understand this process, the other two, you'll understand why they're there and how they fit into the electron transport chain. Before humanity figured out how to create dams in order to create energy, life had figured this out millions and millions of years ago. What do I mean by that? Well, the electron transport chain is very much analogous to a dam, where you have more water on one side and less water on the other side. And in the barrier, you have a hole that has a turbine so that as the water flows from one side to the other side, it turns the turbine, which then creates energy in the form of electricity, which then goes and powers our, machines and our cities and our civilization. Now, if the water levels are the same, water doesn't flow from one side to the other side, and so you don't get that turbine spinning, and so we don't produce any energy. Life has figured out an ingenious way to address this. It's done it by attaching these pumps in the barriers, so that as the water level drops and achieves equilibrium, it pumps the water from one side to the other side to again build that water gradient, so that you have more water on one side and less water on the other side. This water then again can flow through the turbine, turning it, again creating energy. Now that we've seen how the dam works, let's look at how the electron transport chain is similar to our dam analogy. The electron transport chain, it happens inside the mitochondria. Now the mitochondria is like a power factory for the cell. That's where it makes all its energy. Now the mitochondria has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. And in between the outer membrane and the inner membrane, you have a space called the intermembrane space. Inter meaning between membrane space. So it makes sense, right? Scientists are so clever with their names. Anyway, so we have those pumps in the inner membrane. And so you can think of the intermembrane space as a side that has more water, in our analogy of the dam, as a side of the dam that has more water, and the mitochondrial matrix as a side that has less water. But inside the mitochondria, we don't pump water through these membranes, through these barriers. Instead, what gets pumped is positive hydrogen ions, known as protons. So let's actually look at the electron transport chain and look at the machines that are involved. So you can see that there are four complexes that are involved. You have complex 1, which is a pump. Complex 3 is also a pump. And complex 4 is also a pump. The only one that's left sorry, is complex 2. I chose the wrong finger. That's the issue. Complex 2 isn't a pump because you can see that it doesn't traverse through the whole membrane. Now, let's look at how these pumps work and how many protons it actually pumps through from the mitochondrial matrix in the intermembrane space. Remember, once we build a gradient, so once there's more water on one side of the dam, that water is going to go through the hole and turn the turbine. essentially, that's exactly what's happening in the electron transport chain. We want to build up the level of protons in the intermembrane space so that eventually it goes through a hole and turns the turbine, which is ATP synthase, to create energy for us. But let's just focus on these four complexes. So these four complexes need energy. Pumps don't work on magic, right? I wish it did. It'd be beautiful. Instead, they use energy in the form of electricity. And so they get their energy from different batteries. So there are different types of batteries. NADH is one battery. FADH2 is another type of battery. And ATP is a third type of battery. Out of these three batteries, ATP is like your AAA battery. It is very prevalent, right? Your remotes take AAA batteries, Game Boys used to take AAA batteries. A lot of different machines can work with AAA batteries. Whereas the NADH and FADH2, they are slightly bigger batteries and they aren't as commonly used. The electron transport chain wants to make these batteries that are commonly used by the machines that keep us alive. Now, the cool thing about ATP is that you can tell how much energy it's got. It's like your battery, right? When you look at your phone and it's got 100% charge, that's like ATP. When it's got like 50% charge, that will be like ADP. And if it's AMP, because it's got only one phosphate, then it'll be like zero charge, essentially. So based on the number of phosphates, you can tell what the charge of the molecule is, or how much energy it has, rather, based on the phosphate groups. And you can do a similar thing with NADH and FADH2, but not with phosphates. So if FADH2 has 2 electrons, and when it has those 2 electrons, it's fully charged. But when it doesn't have those 2 electrons, it becomes FAD+. And so it's not charged anymore. Same thing with NADH. NADH is negative, it's got full charge, but as soon as you take out that hydrogen that has those electrons, what happens? It becomes NAD+, which has no charge. So we use one battery to power these machines to pump the protons into the intermembrane space in order to create a gradient and use the turbine to create energy, or to power up another battery called ATP, because it's more common, it works with different types of machinery inside the cell. And so NADH gives its electrons to the first complex, and as a result, 4 protons are pumped in the intermembrane space. And once those electrons are used, those electrons are then passed on to Q. Think of Q like Uber, right? It takes these electrons and then gives them to complex 3, comes back, takes more electrons and takes them to complex 3. And then complex 3 takes those electrons and uses it to pump out 4 more protons in the intermembrane space. So both complex 1 and 3 pump out 4 protons each. Through complex 1 gives it to Q and then gives it to complex 3. So it has to go through Uber and then complex 3 gets it. Complex 3, once it pumps these protons, it has to give it to another like courier company. We'll just call it Lyft, because that's like the competitor for Uber. And this is called cytochrome C. So this Lyft company that takes the electrons from complex 3 to complex 4 is called cytochrome C. And once those electrons go to complex 4, it pumps out 2 protons when it uses those electrons, but it doesn't pump out 4. The other 2 protons join with a oxygen atom, and in the process it makes water. And this is why this is called aerobic respiration. It's because we need oxygen in this process for this to happen. So through using NADH, which is a battery, we've pumped out 10 protons, 4 in the first complex, 4 in the third complex, and 2 in the fourth complex. So we have 10 protons more in the intermembrane space than we have in the mitochondrial matrix. Now these protons will go through and find that turbine, right? That water is going to go through the turbine. And so our turbine over here is called ATP synthase. And as the protons go through the turbine turns. And essentially what this ATP synthase, how it works is it gets an ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, and gets a phosphate group and squeezes it together to create ATP. So essentially, we want to create ATP by using the same process as we used in the dam. And this turbine is very interesting, this ATP synthase, because it squeezes ADP and ATP together. But that's the easy bit. You can create ATP very easily. The most of the energy is actually used in kicking it out of the complex. It's very much like, imagine you had neighbors, right? And they are having a marriage issue. They're always breaking up and getting back together. But your job is to help them get back together. So you bring the husband, you bring the wife, and then just in your room, inside your house, you just convince them, you squeeze them together, and then they're like, oh my God, you're the one, I love you. And then they get together, right? But all of a sudden, this couple, getting them together was not so much the challenge, but actually getting them outside your house is the issue. They just start making out, and they're inside your house. You're like, dude, just get out of my house, do this outside. But they just refuse to do that. ATP is very much similar. More energy is made into actually kicking them out than actually putting them together. Now let's look at complex 2. We still haven't talked about complex 2. Complex 2 doesn't traverse the membrane. Instead, it goes halfway through. And complex 2 is actually it's an enzyme that takes the electricity from FADH2 and gives it to Uber, which is Q. And then Q takes it into and gives it to complex 3. And then it goes through the same process that we described for NADH, which is a different battery. Notice that FADH2, this type of battery, only works with complex 2, and NADH only works with complex 1. Because NADH works with complex 1, all 3 pumps are activated because electrons go through all 3. And as a result, we have 10 protons that are pumped. And because FADH2 can only give its electrons to complex 2, it skips the first pump, and as a result, only 2 pumps are activated. And so we pump 6 protons for FADH. Now to make the ATP synthase turn enough so that it squeezes the ADP to ATP, it requires 3 protons. Now these batteries, after they get used up, they need to get recharged again. And that's where glycolysis and the citric acid cycle come into play. Those are the processes that recharge these batteries to keep this electron transport chain going by powering these machines so that we can create AAA batteries, our ATPs. So in the next video, we're going to go through how glycolysis works, and the video after that, how the citric acid cycle works. Through these 2 processes, we're going to look at how these batteries, NADH and FADH2, are charged. We looked at how they were used in the electron transport chain, but we need to look at how they are charged in the first 2 biochemical processes. Now, if you like this video, found it helpful, please do like it, share it, comment if you have any questions, and also make requests. If you want a certain type of video to be made, let me know. If we get enough people requesting it, I'll be more than happy to make it. Anyway, see you guys later. 再见, sayonara, goodbye.